You don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the one that everyone else thinks, oh, there's an amazing leader. That's definitely the person that God is going to use. You can be an ordinary cupbearer, a glorified butler who just happens to care more than anybody else, and one day says, this just isn't right. This whole situation, it's messed up. It's not what God wants to be, and decides to do something about it. You can be an ordinary person and change the world. And today, with the help of God, what I want to do is inspire you, equip you, and empower you to see yourself as a world-changing leader. Because here's the deal. You can make a difference by yourself. You can. You can make a difference by yourself. But if you want to change the world, you're going to need other people. To change the world, you have to see yourself as a leader, equipped and empowered by God. And today I want to get very practical on how you can do that. You don't have to be the best, you just have to care the most. Okay? So let's pick up where we left off in the story of Nehemiah last week. And in the time that we have remaining this morning, we're going to look at 3 characteristics of world-changing leaders from the story of Nehemiah. Okay? 3 characteristics. If you remember back from the story last week, Nehemiah, he's very distraught over the plight of his people. And the fact that the walls of the city of Jerusalem are still in shambles after 140 years. How can this be that nobody has done something about this? 140 years. Again, to put it in context we talked about last week, but that's to say, man, if we had some source of pride and the one source of defense for our nation, that would be as if we had this wall up, that would be as if these walls had been torn down since the late 1800s. That's the context of what we're talking about how long these walls have been in shambles. And Nehemiah says this isn't okay, and his heart breaks over it. And so he goes to his duty in serving the king his wine, but his sadness is all over his face. You can see it on him. And the king confronts him about it, and Nehemiah is very afraid, if you remember in the story. And rightly so, because in those days, kings could have you executed if they didn't like the way you looked. You show up with a sour look on your face and they don't like it, they're going to cut your head off. Okay, that was just the way they rolled back in those days. So you don't mess around in front of the king, and you certainly don't bare your soul before the king of your own personal burdens and struggles. But Nehemiah, his sadness is all over his face. He can't hide it. And so the king confronts him about it, and he's very afraid. So in chapter 2, verse 3, he opens his mouth and he tries to butter the king up a little bit, saying, "May the king live forever." That's how he opens his response to the king. And then he shares his turmoil with the king. And we pick up reading in verse 4. The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, he said, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can" what? What does he say? "So that I can rebuild it." Principle number 1. A change your world leader defines the mission clearly. Again, this is real practical, real simple, but I hope you get this stuff because it's vital and important. If we're going to walk the road that God has for us, if we're going to genuinely try to take the burdens He's given us and do something with them, this stuff is so vital and so important. So a change your world leader defines the mission clearly. Nehemiah didn't beat around the bush, did he? Okay, he's afraid, standing in the presence of the king. He's sad. He's hoping the king won't notice, but the king does notice, and he confronts him about it, and he gulps. Okay, here goes nothing. And he throws up a prayer to the God of heaven and says, "Look, here it is. Here's my situation." And he defines the mission very clearly. The truth is, though, there were probably a ton of great things that Nehemiah could have taken on behalf of his people. Remember, the people of Israel have been in captivity for all these years. The nation of Persia has only sent back a remnant to Jerusalem. And so there are a lot of great projects that Nehemiah could have taken on. The city was completely in shambles. Everything was a mess. But Nehemiah was very clear and very direct in what it was he was being called to do. The king asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he was very clear in communicating his mission. "Send me to Jerusalem so that I can rebuild the wall." That's what I'm called to do, and that's what I'm going to do. Two important things. Let me point out 2 important things that happen when you define the mission clearly, okay? 2 important things happen when you define the mission clearly. Number 1, it gives other people the opportunity to buy in and to get involved. When you define the mission clearly, it gives people the opportunity to buy in and get involved. When other people can clearly understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, they can get excited about it, and it helps them to find clear ways to get involved and be a part of helping you fulfill the mission. And then the second thing that it does is it keeps you from being distracted by other things. Just as with Nehemiah, there are always going to be a ton of really good things that you can be a part of. There always will be. Jesus himself said, you're always going to have the poor amongst you. That isn't an excuse that he was giving not to give to the poor, but he said, look, they're always going to be around. There's always going to be a ton of really great things that you can get involved with. And many things you should be involved with. But when we gain a clear sense of the mission that we've been called to, we can have the freedom to say no. And it's okay to say no sometimes. Jesus himself said no. There were times where people were so in need and he just had to get away. He couldn't do everything for everybody. Sometimes we even have to say no to good things so that we can say yes and fully devote ourselves to the best things. We talked about it last week. You can't possibly do everything, but the truth is you can do something. There is no way possible that you can do everything, but you absolutely can do something. What's the thing for you in this season of your life that God has called you to? What is that thing for you? That your heart breaks, that burden on your heart, and you say, this is not okay. What is that? Define it clearly. Define it clearly. And don't rest until you do. And we're going to see in the weeks to come as Nehemiah is laser focused on the mission of rebuilding the wall. And he lets absolutely nothing pull him away from it. He had so many things coming his way that should have slowed him down and should have stopped him. And he was laser focused on the mission, saying nothing is going to stop me from accomplishing what God has called me to do. Here's the thing. If you can't clearly define the mission, you can't clearly fulfill the mission. Right? Common sense. It's not rocket science, but it's a big deal. If you can't clearly define what it is you're trying to do, how in the world are you ever going to do it? You don't have a clue what you're trying to do. If you can't clearly define the mission, you can't clearly fulfill the mission. It's as simple as that. So there was this guy who had a burden for children with disabilities. That's great, right? That's a wonderful burden to have, man. Kids who have disabilities. But do you know how many children there are with disabilities in the world? Where do you start? I'm one person. How could I ever make a difference? Well, come to find out, he had a child with autism. So he was really, really passionate about kids with autism. That's great. Now we're getting somewhere. We're narrowing in, right? It's not just kids with disabilities. I really want to focus on kids with autism. Well, that's great. What are you going to do, though, for kids with autism? Well, it turns out he really wants to help them become fully functioning members of society. That's really what it's about. I want to teach them. I want to help them function in society, become fully functioning members. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? But where do you begin? Kids with autism in China or Australia or France? Where? There's kids with autism everywhere, right? Well, it turns out a really great place to begin was right in the city that he lived in. So his mission went from simply having a burden for children with disabilities to helping autistic children in his city become fully functioning members of society. Those are two different things, aren't they? I really have a heart for kids with disabilities. Well, wait, what I really want to do is I want to help autistic children in my city become fully functioning members of society. Now he has something tangible that people, number one, can buy into and they can get behind. I get that. The disabilities thing, that's cool and that's well, and that burden is great, but where do you even start and how do I even get involved to help you? But when you clearly define the mission, now people understand, yeah, I get it. I get what you're trying to do. What do we do to make that happen? And you can get involved. Now he has something tangible people can buy in and get involved with, and he has something clear and focused that helps him to avoid all the really good distractions that might come his way. Does that make sense? Sort of what we're talking about. I heard the story of a woman also who was part of a huge church. She was part of a church that was over 50,000 people. Huge church. The thing that broke her heart more than anything was children who had been orphaned. That's a great burden too, huh? Kids who don't have parents, abandoned, or their parents have died. Well, as she took that burden and began to pray about a sense of mission, God, what are you calling me to do? The thing that God inspired her with was to work toward finding a home for every adoptable child in their state. Turns out there were 8,000 of them. Do you see the sense of mission now? You're part of a community of people of 50,000 people. Would it be too much to expect that among a church of 50,000 people, that God could inspire 8,000 of them to adopt one child and eradicate orphan children in that state? Wouldn't that be amazing? Isn't that something you can get excited about and say, man, we could do this. We could be a part of this. It's defining the sense of mission. And that became the mission that they began to work towards and are still working towards today. So what is it for you? What is it for you? What is the burden God has given you? And how do you translate that burden into a clearly defined sense of mission that keeps you laser focused and allows others to buy in and get involved? I'm giving you great principles here, but no, this is not stuff. I don't expect you to have it all figured out by the time you walk out the doors in half an hour. That's not what it's about. Take these principles, and I hope this is stuff you'll wrestle with in your life groups. And this is part of why we need life groups so much and need other people in our life that can help us wrestle through what this means. But take these principles. What is it for you? What is that sense of burden? And how do you clearly define that mission? So the king says to Nehemiah, what do you want to do? And Nehemiah responds, I need to go back to Jerusalem, and I need to rebuild the walls. That's what I need to do. A Change Your World leader defines the mission clearly. The second thing a Change Your World leader does is he or she makes plans carefully. And if you're looking for overwhelmingly wowing spiritual principles today, they're not in this message. It's incredibly practical, and it's that way on purpose. Because at some point we've got to take what God is inspiring with us and we've got to get practical with it. We've got to figure out, how do we do something with this? Because if we don't get to that point where we make it practical and we start to do something with the burden God has placed in our heart, we're just blowing air. And I don't want to blow air anymore. I want to be a part of changing the world, and I hope you guys do too. So the second thing a Change Your World leader does is he or she makes plans carefully. We've already got the what. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. I'm going to go back to Jerusalem and we're going to rebuild the walls. But now we've got to talk about the how, right? How do we do it? How are we going to bring this about? Someone once said, you may have heard this before, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. When you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Watch as Nehemiah lays out a very specific plan to rebuild the walls. Chapter 2 and verse 6, if you're following along. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take? And when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. In other words, he had done his homework. He prepared. The king asked him how long it was going to take him, and he was able to give him an answer. And because he was prepared and able to give the king an answer, it pleased him, and he agreed to let him go. Verse 7 goes on, I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, which was the main passage area through the land, so that they will provide me safe conduct or safe passage until I arrive in Judah. So Nehemiah has thought this through. Is basically what this passage is telling. He's thought this through. It's not like he just showed up in the king's presence one day and totally depressed and sad and whining and complaining. He tells the king his problem, and then the king asks him all these questions. I don't know. Really thought about it. He's totally thought about it. He's totally made plans. He's planned and he's prepared. He's got a long journey of over 1,000 miles, and there's no airplanes or cars or buses or trains. He's got to huff it. And perhaps not everyone he recognizes is going to look too kindly upon him on this journey that he's on. And so he asks the king for a letter to grant him safe passage, that he'll have a letter from the king that he's on the king's business, basically, is what the letter will tell him.